Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Kaffeepause. Each week, we check in with Berlin-based journalists to talk about the emerging stories and breaking news. Of course, we're in mid-August, and in the summer, things are slower, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to talk about. And so I am very pleased to be joined today by Henrike Roßbach. She's been a correspondent in the Parliamentary Bureau of the Süddeutsche Zeitung since early 2018. Henrike, herzlich willkommen.
Thanks for having me.
I am really pleased to talk to you today and look forward to our conversation. But before we dive in, especially since we're in the middle of summer, can you talk to us a little bit about the political mood in Berlin? What are the topics? What are the concerns on people's mind at the moment?
Well, as you already mentioned it, we're in the midst of summer, so it's pretty quiet here in the government area in Berlin, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing going on. In fact, there's one very big issue discussed in Germany right now, and this is energy prices. As you probably all know, Germany is very reliable on gas imports from Russia via the pipeline Nord Stream 1 and also other pipelines. And since the beginning of summer, we only receive like 40% of the average or normal amount of gas from Russia. And this is raising questions concerning the winter. And if Germany will have enough gas, not just for heating all the apartments and houses, but also for the German industry, which is heavily relying on gas. And so there's a big issue: who's going to pay for the rising gas prices? Since the first gas import company already has difficulties, so the German government had to step in, and there's going to be every household will be required by fall to pay an extra amount to stabilize all the gas importing companies, which is going to be very expensive. And right now in Berlin, the discussion goes on how the government can help families, can help people with small incomes to be able to pay for their gas.
So thank you for setting the stage, particularly with the energy issue, because I think that that's a great way of sort of backing into what I wanted to talk to you about today. There are tremendous concerns about recession in Germany. There are worries that recession has its origin in geopolitical conflicts, record energy prices, but also disrupted supply chains, and of course, rising taxes and rising expenses. And this is all putting the government under significant pressure. And so I think a lot of people are looking at the fall when these prices are expected to go up even more. These energy prices are expected to go up even more, and when there could actually be some energy shortages, and how the government is planning to respond to this. So I'd like to sort of spend some of our time today talking about just the general economic outlook for Germany, but also about the Free Democratic Party, one of the coalition partners in the government, and specifically Christian Lindner, who's the finance minister. You, of course, cover these issues. You cover the FDP. And so I'd be interested in your take on how the FDP is doing in the current government. Christian Lindner, of course, came in wanting to have a balanced budget, wanting to have a schwarzer Null. But of course, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the energy crisis, that's becoming increasingly difficult. How is he able to sort of keep the promises that he made?
The situation is definitely not easy for the FDP. As you already mentioned it, they are focused very much on financial stability, and their promise was that Germany, after the pandemic, during the pandemic, there was a lot of spending in Germany, and the debt rose to unknown highs. And they said when we will be part of the government in 2023, there will not be a balanced budget, but we will stick again with the German Schuldenbremse, which is a rule for how high the debt can be can rise. And during the pandemic, the rule wasn't fulfilled for 2 years, and then this year is the third year, I guess, in a row where Germany is where the debt is higher than it's supposed to be according to the rule. And Christian Lindner said, okay, I'm in the government with the Social Democrats and the Greens, so I have to make compromises. And he did this at the beginning of the government. And he said, okay, we take 60 billion euros from last year's budget that haven't been used, and we put it in this year's budget, and we use it for investments in energy, in the green economy. And that was okay with him. It was not a favorite thing to do for him, but that was a kind of compromise. He would say, okay, I can do this. And right now, a couple of weeks ago, he presented his budget plan for the next year. And this budget is goes along with the Schuldenbremse. So the government will only, the new debt is very, very, very much smaller than it used to be in this year and last year. So, and this raises a lot of concerns regarding the energy prices, the ongoing war in Ukraine, the disrupted supply chains, and the economic outlook for Germany. If we can stick to this budget plan, if we can, it means that not everything that is wishful can be paid for. And otherwise, if the crisis gets really bad, like if Germany will no longer receive any gas from Russia, which is quite possible, then Germany is very likely going into a really bad recession. And then there will probably be difficulties for Lindner to stick to his budget plan. And then the debt will rise again above the Schuldenbremse, above the debt rule. And this will be very difficult for the Liberal Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Henrike, there are two other elements that I'd like to ask you about related to the spending. I mean, of course, the one is in his Zeitenwende speech, Chancellor Scholz talked about a Sondervermögen, a special fund for the Bundeswehr of 100 billion, which of course was approved by the Bundestag, by the parliament. And this is an additional expense that needs to be considered. He had also talked about increasing Germany's defense spending in general to meet the 2% of GDP that the NATO member states had agreed to in 2014. One question is how does the defense expenditure side of things factor into Lindner's budget planning and concerns about the debt break? But the other question has much more to do with domestic politics, because one of the sort of pledges or commitments that the new government made when they came in was to build something like 400,000 new apartments in Germany to try to sort of deal with the housing shortage that exists there. I could easily imagine that some of those promises that were made during the pandemic, but before the war in Ukraine, before the current energy crisis, might be pushed to the back burner. But are those still promises that this government hopes to keep?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me first say something about the military expenditures, expenses. The regular military budget will pretty much stay as high as it is right now in the following years, in the upcoming years. But the special budget, the 100 billion euros, they will be used to meet the NATO goal of the 2% GDP spending on military. So this is why Lindner agreed to this Sondervermögen, because he said, so then we have this fund and we can use the fund for all our investments that are necessary to build up the Bundeswehr in the way we have to. Because right now the geopolitical situation is different than it was before. There's no longer the possibility to think we live in a peaceful world and we can live with a Bundeswehr as it is today. No, we cannot, because we have international agreements on what we have to do as a country. So so this will be paid for by the Sondervermögen, so the extra expenses.
Mm-hmm.
The housing sector is really a big issue in Germany, as it is probably in many countries all over the globe. The thing is, the government says we want 400,000 more apartments, but they cannot build them on their own, of course. So they need the construction companies and the building and the investment sector to put their money in the housing market. But there are a lot of restrictions because there's not enough labor, there's not enough materials, there's not enough, the supply chains are not only disrupted, but it's just not enough. So, and if now the government starts large spending on the housing sector, prices will go up even higher, and it will be even more difficult to reach those goals. Mm-hmm. So this is really difficult, and the solution is not there yet. It's still a goal, but there has been goals like this for the past years, and they never were met. So housing is the big social question here in Germany. Rents are rising, and the prices for apartments and houses and land are rising as well. And so far, nobody has the perfect answer for that. You have to build, but building is limited because of labor and supply chains. So yeah, this is a big issue as well.
The government is still sort of in its early phases, if you will, right? I mean, it only formed, the election only took place in late September. The government only formed in December. It has obviously had a learning curve in its role in government, and the constellation of this coalition of SPD, Greens, and FDP. They've been distracted a little bit by the pandemic, certainly by the war in Ukraine, certainly by the energy crisis. Do you think that the housing issue will remain an important topic for this government as it moves through its time in office?
Yes, I think so. Right now, the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine is the number one subject, but definitely the social questions in the back are very important and will stay on the agenda. They decided to have a special ministry for building. And this was meant to be, this was meant as a sign, as a signal to show this is important to us. And I think it will stay on the agenda. But of course, the current crisis is so deep and so challenging. And after the winter, if everything goes fine, if the winter will be okay, if we will have enough gas, if gas prices will not be skyrocketing, then perhaps we will return to other political issues in the spring. And but right now there's the war, there's the energy crisis, and this is what everybody's talking about.
So I have a couple of viewer questions I'd like to fold in. One of our viewers here in New York writes, as the German public deals with higher inflation and energy shortages, is there a shift in sentiment related to the Russia-Ukraine war, i.e. are Germans still supportive of sanctions against Russia, considering their economic consequences?
Yes, the majority is still supportive. But of course, as the prices are rising and as people start to feel this war at their house, at their apartment, when they see their bill, they start to think, is this really necessary and how long can we take this? When the Minister for Economics, Robert Habeck, who's also an important figure in the Green Party, he was on a summer trip to visit some cities and to talk to people, and he was booed in one town, and there were very critical questions concerning what are you thinking? You're ruining our business, you're ruining our family. Who's going to pay for this? Why don't we open up Nord Stream 2, which is the pipeline that has not opened because of the war, part of the sanctions? The majority is still very supportive, but of course, the more difficult the situation gets, and the more people feel it at home, that they have less money, that they have to spend more for their housing, more for their energy prices. Of course, there will be questions raised, but right now the sentiment is still pro-Ukrainian and pro-sanctions.
Since you mentioned Nord Stream 2, I think I heard over the weekend that Olaf Scholz said in no uncertain terms that Nord Stream 2 would not go into operation. So despite sort of strong statements from government officials like that, there are still people in the public who have a desire to have it go into operation?
It's sometimes heard when Robert Habeck was on tour last week, there were people saying open up Nord Stream 2, but it's just like singular persons in a crowd saying this. But also in the political, some politicians in the eastern part of Germany also already said, well, there is gas in the pipeline Nord Stream 2. We just have to open it up. If Nord Stream 1 is not working, we can use Nord Stream 2. But right now, it's nobody from the political establishment, nobody from the government. But of course, there are voices like this, but they are the minority right now still.
So speaking about gas, another viewer writes that since you mentioned a 60% reduction in gas from Russia, this viewer is curious to know how this reduction has been interpreted both by the media and by the general public. Is it seen as a technical issue, or is it seen as a result of NATO's actions against Russia, or is it seen as a form of blackmail by Russia against Germany and against the West? And I guess I would add a fourth element. Could it be seen as an effort by Germany to wean itself off of this gas dependence?
I think generally it's seen as blackmailing Germany. Russia says there are technical difficulties. One turbine was in Canada for repairs, but now it's back in Germany. It can be delivered anytime to St. Petersburg or anywhere else if Russia says, yes, we will take the turbine. So the technical problems stated by Russia, they are, as far as Germany is concerned, they are not true. So there could be gas, the full gas supply via Nord Stream 1. And of course, Russia is trying to apply pressure on Germany with regards to the sanctions and the war and the support of Ukraine. Also, Germany is also sending weapons and munition and tanks and stuff to the Ukraine. So Russia tries to use the power it has on Germany, and this is the gas, the dependency on Russian gas. So, and this is seen, and this is how it is mainly seen in the public. Mm-hmm. So that the technical problem is not the problem. Of course, Germany tries to reduce its dependency on Russian gas. In the past years, the Greens, for example, often stated that this is a dangerous dependency Germany has, and right now everybody can see it. And this is raising concerns also with regards to China, because there are also a lot of dependencies via China on different fields, but like pre-products. And as you can see now, the lockdown in the Chinese cities and harbors is disrupting the European and German industry. So there's a whole different view right now on this globalization idea and on the idea of outsourcing important and crucial parts of the economy to countries that are not on the same page with us when it comes to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So definitely there's something changing and shifting, but right now Germany is still relying on Russian gas, and the reduction means that we have to buy gas somewhere else to way higher prices. And this is the reason why the gas prices, even for the people, for the families, is rising, and for the industry as well.
Mm-hmm. So I've since we're talking about energy, I have two related questions from viewers. One of our viewers writes that since the focus has been on coping with energy related inflation, how is the government progressing on green energy related investment? The viewer goes on to write, is the FDP and is Minister Lindner as much on board with expanding green investment as this stage as the Green Party, or is the fiscal priority right now about trying to deal with the immediate fossil fuel situation?
Christian Lindner called green energy a couple of months ago. The first time he said it's freedom energy, since we realized that gas from Russia doesn't mean freedom at all. So he says, if we rely only on green energy, one day we will be free. So this is something he supports, and we have in Germany a large so-called, it's like an extra fund, the Klima- and Transformationsfonds, and there are billions of euros in it, and they are used for investments in green energy and in meeting the climate change and adapting. So this is an important issue also for the FDP. But right now, of course, the Greens, the Social Democrats, and the Liberals, they are focused on what can we do now to get over the winter. So, and we're trying to buy as much gas as we can from anywhere else but Russia. And we're trying to stock up our gas tanks so that they are pretty much full when we go into winter. And the German energy net can not only work on green energy. We also need, usually we use gas, electricity, Gaskraftwerke.
Yeah,
gas plants.
Gas power plants. Yeah.
Yeah, gas power plants to stabilize the energy net. And this is not a very good idea when you're short of gas. So right now we're using coal instead of gas. And this means that the climate balance will go up instead of down. So this is the problem right now. And it's a trade-off Germany has to make, and especially the Green Party. And right now they are willing to do this because they say we cannot act as if Putin would not have started a war in Ukraine. So we have to, the trade-off is bad. And right now we use coal. We never wanted more coal. We wanted less coal. But this is the ad hoc reaction of the government. But in the longer run, they all agree on focusing and investing in green energy even more than we already did.
So maybe as a follow-up to that, since we were talking about housing before, one of our viewers is curious whether these new housing units that are going to be built are taking climate change into account, and whether these will be green buildings or whether they'll be sort of built in the traditional manner.
In Germany, we already have very strict regulations for new houses that are built, no matter if it's a house that you and I build somewhere in the countryside, or if it's a a large house with many apartments, maybe even built by a public a company. So there are restrictions, and there's there are rules for how much energy a building can use, how thick have the walls to be, what kind of windows do we have to use, and maybe there has to be a green grass on rooftops and all this stuff. So there are already a lot of regulation, and it's not possible to build new houses that do not meet the regulations we have right now. So pretty much everything that's built new is on a very high energy efficient level. The problem is rather the houses that are still there, and they have to be renovated to, and this would be even more efficient than building new, because a lot of heat is lost because of old buildings, old windows, old roofs. So, and this is another important goal, to make the houses that already exist better and more climate friendly.
Henrike, I'd like to maybe change gears just a little bit. It seems as if at least part of the inflation in the Eurozone is being imported from the United States. We're seeing a very strong dollar at the moment. This, of course, is influencing the cost of food, of raw materials that are traded in dollars, and it is also having an impact on the energy market, where one often sees payments being made in dollars. And so this is making a barrel of oil more expensive, or a kilowatt hour of gas more expensive. How much concern is there in Germany right now about the strong dollar?
I would say it's nothing that is on the mind of just ordinary people down the street, unless they want to travel to the US and they realize how expensive everything is. When I was to the US as a student, there used to be $1, €1, and everything was very expensive for me. So I still can remember how those times were. And of course, there is a concern among the German industry, among the Ministry of Finance, and especially companies that are doing business with the US. And but it's not on the minds of like normal people usually, because currency stuff is difficult to understand and to anticipate. But of course, the ECB is also looking on how is the euro doing in comparison to the dollar and other currencies. But the inflation situation is nevertheless very difficult in Europe, as it is in the US. The ECB started much later than the Fed to do something about the inflation, to raise interest rates. Now they did it, but there's no comparison to what the Fed already did. So inflation is a huge problem, especially because the governments cannot meet the economic crisis as they would if there would be no inflation. So right now interest rates are rising. It's more expensive to raise the debt for governments. So you have to consolidate your budget with regards to the rising interest rates and to inflation. And an expensive spending program is also difficult when you have high inflation rates, because the ECB has to look after countries with very high debt rates like Greece and Italy, and these countries also have to expand they have to help the people in their country to cope with energy prices, etc., but they do not have the money. So it's very difficult right now when you look at inflation in Germany and in Europe as a whole.
So since we're talking about sort of Europe more broadly, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about some developments on Friday related to the EU's Stability and Growth Pact. Christian Lindner gave an interview in the German daily Handelsblatt. His ministry also released a short position paper on the Stability and Growth Pact. And basically what the Stability and Growth Pact does is it sets out rules governing how much debt member states can take on and how quickly they need to pay it back. And it seems as if Berlin is making some concessions, but that Christian Lindner's position is that there should be very strict enforcement of the rules laid out in the Stability and Growth Pact. Can you talk a little bit about sort of Germany's position on the Stability and Growth Pact and how Christian Lindner's statements on Friday, how this position paper have been received?
So Germany has a long tradition of monetary stability. We used to have the Deutsche Mark, which was a very stable currency, and the German government was always pretty strict when it came to sticking with the rules with the Stability and Growth Pact. And during the financial crisis in the southern parts of Europe, like in Greece, Spain, and Italy, they were not very fond of the German position to be so strict and to say, okay, you can get money and you will get loans, but you have to show us that you do something about your deficits. You have to reduce your spending, et cetera, et cetera. And that was very difficult in the European Union, that the North, the countries in the North, with Germany on top and the countries in the South, they had very different situations concerning their financial stability and their debt. And so Germany is known to be rather hawkish on deficits. And but now with the pandemic, the rules have never been followed as strictly as they should have been. And with the pandemic, the European Commission said, right now you do not have to follow the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact, because we see this pandemic and government spending has to be possible. But right now, Germany says we have to return to the rules, but not to unrealistic rules that have never been met since we have this pact. So they try to have a more efficient enforcement, and they say there's a particular rule of how you are supposed to cut back on your deficit, but this rule cannot be applied by countries like Italy or Greece because their debt is way too high. They would have to reduce. They would have to reduce their spending in such big steps. This would not be possible. So Germany says, okay, we do not longer stick to this rule, but we imply another enforcement rule. We say, okay, this is the goal you have, and we will have a kind of contract or promise that you are going to try to reach this goal in a specific amount of time. So this can be negotiated. So in fact, Germany wants to keep the pact pretty much as it is, but to make it more efficient and more realistic so that it can be.
And it seems like part of that has to do with introducing new mechanisms for enforcing the rules, right? Recognizing that there needs to be flexibility because there are unanticipated events, but wanting to really improve the enforcement mechanisms as well. Is that the case?
Yeah, that is the case. But the problem was not that the pact was not flexible enough in times of crisis, but that in times of no crisis, a lot of countries still did not cut back their deficit as they should have. And this means that right now, when the pandemic hit Europe, there were countries with a very good debt situation that could easily spend billions and billions of euros on helping on their economy, on helping their people. And others had to do this as well, but from a very, very different and worse situation concerning their financial situation. And this means that in the good years, countries cut back a little, but not as much as they should have. And some did still rise their debt. Also, they had good years with high tax incomes, etc.
One of the aspects that I thought was very interesting was there have been proposals made by France and Italy to exempt spending for green purposes or for defense purposes from the EU's debt rules. And as we've talked about in our conversation, these are two areas of particular concern in Germany, and yet the German response has been that countries could exceed investment limits on a one-time, narrowly defined basis, not allowing the kind of flexibility that I think France and Italy might have wanted. Can you talk at all about why Germany's taking this sort of harder approach?
I guess the fear of Christian Lindner especially is that if there are exemptions on what kind of investments count for the Stability Act and which investments do not count, it will be easy for governments. It will be always a question of definition. So is this a kind of investment that will be exempt, or is this an investment that counts? And so there will be ongoing discussions, and always the idea of governments to label their investments and their government spending as green investments or as anti-crisis investments, just to not make them count for the Stability and Growth Act and for the rules of the 3% GDP, new debt rising, etc. So I think it's a question of reducing possibilities to find a way around the rules. Mm-hmm. This is as I explained it to myself.
Mm-hmm. So unrelated to this, one of our viewers just submitted a question about Brexit. He's curious as to whether or not, in light of all of the other issues and challenges that have arisen in recent months, whether Brexit has disappeared or whether there are still concerns over Brexit in Germany.
I think it's definitely a little bit in the background right now. I'm not a Brussels correspondent, so I guess in Brussels it's still an important topic, especially because of the current government in the UK. They still have discussions on how to deal with Northern Ireland and the Northern Irish borders and all this stuff. So I think in Brussels and also in the capitals of Europe, it is still a topic, but it's a little bit disappeared in the background because of all the other crises that hit Europe so hard, and things have not gotten as bad as feared with Brexit right now, because there have been very long discussions with Britain, and finally they reached an agreement and a treaty. And if this agreement will be cancelled by UK, maybe, so by the current government, then that would have been a bigger problem. But right now, the government in London has its very own problems. So this is not a very urgent subject right now.
So perhaps in closing, we can talk about something briefly that we have not yet talked about, but which I think is a concern that all of us have, namely the continuation of the COVID pandemic. We all are seeing some rising numbers, although some things are flattening out in some places, but with a view to the fall and the winter, there are concerns that there will be new variants, and that policymakers might have to add some new restrictions. Over the weekend, there was some critique voiced by the Christian Democrats against Karl Lauterbach, the Social Democrat health minister. Minister President Schwesing was talking about trying to have unity at the state level and trying to have some agreement between the federal government and the state governments about policies that should be in place. And of course, tomorrow, the state health ministers will have a meeting to talk about the Infektionsschutzgesetz, or the law to protect people from infection. Part of the discussion is also about um, making masks mandated in Germany again. Can you talk a little bit about the concerns about COVID in the fall and winter, and what is actually being thought about, what's being considered, what's being done?
I guess it's a little bit as in the United States. In the public, half of the people are rather, well, the majority thinks Germany handled it okay, and what will be done for the winter will be okay as well. And then there is a smaller part of people saying we're doing way too much. This pandemic is perhaps not over, but it's part of our normal life. And as other countries did, we also should cut back on regulations. And there's another small part that says we're not doing enough. Mask mandates in public spaces are not enough. We have to do more. So the discussion is always there, and it's very, very different among how people look on the pandemic. And it's also within the government. The health minister, Karl Lauterbach, also the Democrat, he's rather, if he could decide alone, he would be way more strict. He's a medicine, he's an expert on this issue, and he's very deep into the scientific community, and he probably would have done more. But on the other hand, the Liberal Democrats, they say we have to respect the freedom rights and of people, and we cannot forever have these pandemic regulations. So Karl Lauterbach and the Minister of Justice, who's a Liberal Democrat, they were discussing for weeks what to do about fall, because the Infektionsschutzgesetz, the law, as you mentioned it, will expire, and we needed a new one. And now they have a compromise, and there will be mask mandates in trains and on airplanes. And the countries, the Bundesländer, they can decide that they'll have mask mandates also in restaurants and in public spaces and in movie theaters. But there are exemptions for when you are freshly vaccinated, or when you just recovered from COVID, or when you're tested. And the problem is right now the vaccines do work in a way that you have a low risk of getting seriously ill, but you still can infect others and you can still get it. But they hope that there will be a vaccine for the current variants in the fall, so that there will be more protection than we have right now from vaccines. But the big discussion going on in Germany right now is freshly vaccinated means for 3 months, and after the 3 months, you will have to wear the masks, because then your vaccination does no longer count. And this is something, there's a discussion going on if this is a good idea and if this is realistic at all. And so the pandemic and the political discussion, and also the discussion within the society, will continue, and there is no real solution on the horizon.
I mean, I guess the good news is, as I heard on Deutschlandradio earlier today, that BioNTech is hopeful about having a new vaccine to deal with some of the new variants. They're hoping to have that available for release in October already. And so perhaps on the vaccine side of things, there is some good news. But I think you're absolutely right, both in Germany and the US, more globally, we'll all be dealing with how to find the right policy prescription to deal with whatever the next sort of wave of COVID cases brings with it.
Yeah, especially as in Europe, we also have to realize how other countries are dealing with the virus and will be dealing with the virus. Is it already an endemic situation where you, just like with influenza, have to live with it, or is it not? And other countries, they already said we do no longer need, you do not longer need to stay at home for 5 days if you're tested positive for COVID. And in Germany, there is still this 5-day period where you have to stay at home. And this means if a lot of people are infected, there will be problems with enough nurses, enough medicines, enough people in the energy sector, etc. So there are problems associated with the pandemic in the winter, even if people do not get seriously ill.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the discussion will be still ongoing. The Infektionsschutzgesetz, the compromise between the Minister of Justice and Health is there, but it still has to be approved by the Parliament, and I think it will still it will not stay as it is right now.
Well, Henrike Roßbach, thank you so much for this conversation today. I'm happy that we were able to take advantage of a relative calm in the summer to think about what the fall and the winter might bring. And I hope that we're able to continue the conversation later this year. We'd love to have you back again at some point, but this was a very interesting and very informative conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, and maybe see you next time.
Okay, take care.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.